what's fair, what's equal. It's about dignity and respect. I wish I had the Catholic workers with me when I grew up in this little town in Louisiana years ago. We didn't question our government's foreign policy, the militarism, the death machines. When Vietnam came upon us, I volunteered to go off to that war, as many of us did. Our greatest enemy in life often is ignorance. But that experience for many of us, myself included, was a turning point. I, like so many of us, had discovered we're not made for war. We cannot possibly go about war, violence and killing, and go on with our lives as before. We read so much about PTSD, suicides. Put simply, we're not made for war. And it was in Vietnam during that year that shook me. Death was close and my faith became more important. The real people who kept me awake there were the children at this orphanage nearby. Their parents had been killed by our bombs. And for the first time, I began to see that connection between our presence there, my country, and their suffering and death. I realized I'd been in the military now for 4 years. I realized I could not continue. I came home and joined the Maryknoll Order, missionaries who work in some 20 countries overseas. I was later ordained and then sent off to serve the poor of Bolivia, where the slum on the outskirts of La Paz became my home for the next 5 years. And there we were, supporting a dictator, General Banzer, brutal, one of many there in Chile, Pinochet, the generals in Argentina, the thugs in Central America. It was in Bolivia where the poor became my teachers. Like they became my teachers in Vietnam. They introduced to me their theology, this theology of liberation that gives hope to the poor, that reminds them of a loving God that does not want them to live in this violence and suffering, to see their children go to bed hungry and die before the ages of 3 and 4. No. This God, they said, is a loving God who created us all equal, who calls us to that table as equals, where no one can say, I'm better, superior, and you're lesser. No, no. And out of that liberation theology, they taught me that all-important word, solidaridad, solidarity. That means simply to make the struggle of others our struggle. And whenever there's an injustice, suffering, violence, death, our silence is that voice of complicity. How true it is. Trying to live out that word solidarity with the people there. Many were arrested, some tortured, some killed. I had a passport. I was a U.S. citizen. I was arrested and kicked out of the country. And that's when I ended up in Chicago and my connection to the Catholic worker movement here. And things happened in El Salvador around that time. Archbishop Oscar Romero was assassinated, gunned down at the altar while saying Mass in this church. A great lover of the poor, a martyr, gave his life for what he believed in. And just months later, 4 church women, 2 of their Maryknoll sisters, 2 of the Ursuline community, the friends of ours, and so many, They were raped and killed by the Salvadoran military. When that happened, it shook us. We went there to just really try to find out how could this happen. The women knew what they were getting into. It was very dangerous. Their loved ones said, "Come home. It's too dangerous." Their response, simple: "We cannot leave the people here. They need us. They need us." And they gave the ultimate for their love for the people. We came home filled with anger because we saw our country getting every day $1 million from our tax money. It was our guns, our bullets doing the killing. As one of the mothers, Jean Donovan's mother, said, "That's what hurts, to know that the gun that killed my daughter was given to that soldier by our country, paid for by our taxes." And we read that 525 Salvadoran soldiers had arrived at Fort Benning, Georgia, to start training in combat in the art of killing. That's when I, in a small group, said, no, not in our name, no. We went to Fort Benning, and we stood vigil for a while, fasted, gave a few talks, and then the moment came for the talking to stop. It was time to act. 3 of us, Larry Rosebaum, an oblate priest, and if you know, was later assassinated in Guatemala. Larry, and then there was Linda Ventimiglia, who was in the Army Reserves, who came from a military family, joined our little group of 3. We dressed as high-ranking Army officers, and we went on to Fort Benning at night. With us, we had this very powerful boombox, and it was the last sermon of Bishop Romero that he gave in the cathedral the day before he was assassinated. Well, he made his plea to the military, saying, "Stop the killing. Lay down your weapons," he said. "Disobey your superior officers telling you to kill your fellow campesinos. And obey a higher law, that law of God that says, 'Thou shalt not kill.'" He knew the consequences. And the next day, he was assassinated while saying this. He knew something else. The truth cannot be silenced. He said that just days before he was killed. They can kill me, but they cannot silence this message of love and truth and nonviolence and peace. It will live on in the pueblo, he said, in the people. And they will not be silent. And how true it is. It was a sacred moment when we were in that tree with this last sermon. When the last lights went out in the barracks, we simply said, "Bishop Romero, this is for you, brother." And his voice, his last sermon, just moved into the barracks. It was like poking a beehive. And they came out of the barracks with their guns and dogs. For us, a sacred moment. They didn't see it that way. And they threatened to shoot us down if we didn't come down. It was time to come back. Left the boom box up there with the message repeated a number of times. "Stop. Lay down your weapons." We, of course, were brought to jail, later to trial. And many of you have been there. I read that great story recently about Jess. And trial is important. We try to, as we've all gone through this, we want to say why we did what we did. Trying to call attention to that injustice, that evil. To be a voice for others who cannot be there. judge that you've been before so often. This judge didn't want to hear it. He sent us to prison for 1.5 years. No regrets. One of the best retreats I've ever been on. We got out of prison and went to work, but we couldn't stop it. We couldn't stop the violence. It got worse. The military need increased. The bloodshed continued. Now they went after the Jesuits at their university there in San Salvador. These 6 Jesuits and their co-worker, young mother Elma, and her teenage daughter Selena, dragged out of their rooms in the middle of the night and massacred, shot at close range, along the way. This made the front pages of newspapers all over the world. Members of Congress who voted for that aid every year knew some of the Jesuits, educated at some of their universities. They sent a congressional task force to investigate. They come back reporting that those who did the killing were trained on U.S. soil down in Georgia at the U.S. Army School of the Americas at Fort Benning, Georgia. And we read about their findings, front pages of newspapers. I got on the phone and started calling friends. It's time to go back to Georgia. There's something we have to do at Fort Benning. Once again. And we went, 10 of us gathered there. Took a while to bring folks together. Kathy Kelly, a good friend of us, is with us. Charlie Litke, Vietnam vet, recipient of the Medal of Honor. 2 Dominican priests, a Jesuit, 3 Salvadorans who had to flee their country with death threats. We started a 35-day water-only fast to try to call attention to the issue. We learned a lot from Gandhi and Cesar Chavez and others, Dorothy Day, and so many in the movement we have fasted to express that solidarity, to expose an injustice. But after the fast, there was work to be done. We said, let's not leave. I stayed, others came. We opened up an office in Washington, D.C. We started the SOA Watch movement just with a small group. We said, let's gather at the main gate of Fort Benning every November, that weekend before Thanksgiving. Let's put our feet here. Let's come in the name of peace to express our solidarity with our sisters and brothers of these countries throughout Latin America who are being made to suffer because of these soldiers that we are training at the School of the Americas, and the untold suffering and death that they're causing. Our numbers grew as we started to spread the word. We started learning more about this school. 25 countries here in Latin America. They came here to learn counterinsurgency. Who are the insurgents? Well, they've always been the poor, the land reformers, the healthcare workers, religious leaders like Romero, the churchmen, the Jesuits, and others in liberation theology there. They were the targets. And then there were the torture manuals, techniques of torture, how to disappear people, how to get information from them. When we were gathered, we went from 10 to 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, over the years 20,000. A celebration of hope. Speaking with one voice from all over the country, coming young and old, diversity. Speaking with one voice for peace. Stop the killing, close down the school of assassins. in our big movement, we said, you've got to reach out to papers, you've got to get on the internet, you've got to give talks. We came out with this documentary, School of Assassins, and got Susan Sarandon to narrate it for us, and got us an Oscar nomination, which really helped. And that little documentary helped break down our interests, our ignorance. And then all of a sudden, these editorials from major newspapers started to appear around the country that gave us hope. There's the New York Times, their editorial, School of the Dictators. The Washington Post, the School of Scandal. The Boston Globe, School of Assassins. Detroit Free Press. Harvard University. And all the reasons why it should be closed. Chicago Tribune, one school that should be closed. And here it is, the Des Moines Register, a school not needed. When we gathered there for the vigil, great musicians, Steve and so many are there to uplift the spirit, the puppetistas, the speakers from Latin America here at home, so many university students, many nuns, retirees, college students, workshops at night in the convention center dealing with all kinds of other issues that are so connected, where we're not in any way in competition with each other. All of us working in all kinds of projects, all in the name of peace, justice, and equality. And then we started going to Latin America. We said, let's go meet with their presidents and request that they pull out their troops and give them reasons why. Remind them that in the United States, there are a lot of people, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, who are working to close the school. And although we reminded them, over 350 of our people, when we gathered, we crossed the line that Sunday during our solemn funeral procession, carrying the white crosses bearing the names of the victims. And everyone would say, presente. And after the procession, some of us called to go on to Fort Benning. Arrested, normal sentence, usual sentence, 6 months. Sometimes a heavy fine. And then we went to these countries, and we were able to get 5 countries over the last years to pull out their troops. Those countries being Argentina, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador, and Bolivia. It was such a joy to meet with President Evo Morales in Bolivia, the first indigenous president of his country, where he made this announcement he was pulling them out. And whenever they do that, it was a home run. We would celebrate, we would dance. And now the time has come. We're not leaving the struggle, but this year, we're going to the U.S.-Mexico border. We've been on delegations there. We've heard the many stories of our sisters and brothers crossing the border, leaving their countries, especially Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and other countries, and coming at great risk into our country. Many of them died in the desert in Arizona. And they say to us, if we stay, we die. And we know, and they remind us, there is a connection to the School of the Americas and the militarism in our U.S. economic policies there that force them to flee their country. Because if they stay, they will die. They are doing what we would do for ourselves and for our children. And so October the 7th and the 10th, we're going to be in Nogales on the border, Nogales, Arizona. And we're going to be there to once again show our solidarity, support, and love. our refugee sisters and brothers. Check out our website, soaw.org. We'll be doing some civil disobedience, lots of speakers. It's going to be a wonderful experience. And check out the website. It would be wonderful if you could be with us. It was given over the years so many talks around the country, so many churches and colleges about the School of Assassins, and inviting people to join our movement for peace. That I began to meet women who reminded me that there was an injustice very close to home in my church, our church, the Catholic Church. The first woman was Jackie Dickey. And then I met others. Janice is here, Janice Silva, one of our prisoners of conscience who crossed the line and went off to prison. One of many women called and living out that call and said, we have waited long enough. It's time to be ordained after preparation. And she was going to be ordained in Lexington, Kentucky. And she invited me to attend, to be one of the homilists. And I wrote back and said, Janice, it would be a great honor and joy to be there with you. And it was a wonderful celebration. So many hundreds coming together, many from our movement, to celebrate Janice's ordination, saying yes to our loving God, that she will serve our church and the poor, and commit her life to peace and justice and equality, so needed in our world. And I remember the joy that was there. And I came home, and there was a call waiting for me from the Marino headquarters. There were people who didn't, how should we say, share that joy. They had gotten a call from bishops from the Vatican, Word Springs, and I was summoned to the headquarters in New York. And I simply gave the basics. Aren't we created equal, of equal worth and dignity? There's neither male nor female. We're one, as Galatians 3:21 reminds us. And I reminded the leaders in my community who were questioning me this issue about conscience and the very important issue of where this call comes from. I remember Janice's, how she described her call in Jackie Dickey. That call comes from none other than the Creator, God. And I simply asked a basic question. Who are we as men to say that our call from God is authentic, but your call as women is not? Or we tend to fear or reject God's calling. It was the very beginning I really thought that I could use reason and logic and conscience to somehow bring them aboard. But what I didn't realize was that issue of sexism, misogyny, runs very deep. What I didn't realize after a lot of reflection is that when we enter the seminary, we become really the voices of a patriarchy. The Catholic Church is run by men, dominated by men, where women do not have a voice. It is a patriarchy. It is an all-male clerical culture who would see women as lesser, who would see women as a threat to our power. And I remember Janice, in many conversations, and other women really helped educate me, and they reminded me that we cannot talk about this issue without discussing power. How we as men, the patriarchy, would see women, Jackie, Janice, all these other women, as a threat to our power. But what I discovered was something very important. No matter, the more I heard their reasons, their quotes from Pope John Paul saying, we can't even talk about it. I said, really? The last time I was told I couldn't talk about something, I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. We are adults. I had to say this, whether you will discuss it or not, this discussion is going on. It's not going away. It's about equality. And then the letter came. The letter finally came. It said I have to recant. I could not. The letter came from the Vatican. I had 30 days to recant, or I would be expelled. I wrote back, and of course, they said I was causing grave scandal in the church. I wrote back and I simply said, you know, when Catholics hear the word scandal, they cannot think of women being ordained. I could not resist. I have to put down some very basic facts that I got from SNAP. Reminding them that in the United States alone, over 12,000 children were raped and sexually abused by over 6,000 Catholic priests. Well, many of their bishops knew of their crimes, and they sent these priests in order to cover it up, to protect their so-called good name. Sent them to other parishes where they continue their crimes. And I will mention, of course, the all-important issue of conscience. And also simply said that, you know, no matter how hard we may try to justify